Joining me today is Gabe Lacques. He is a USA Today baseball columnist, all things MLB expert. I want to start with the Mets and the Padres, Gabe. I mean, these are two payrolls that didn't look like they could disappoint us at the start of the season, and yet here we are. Let's start with the Mets. Mets fans where I live in New York beside themselves with how poorly they've performed, and it looks like they're past the point of no return. Can they get back into this season? And do you think that they're going to be sellers at the trade deadline?
Yeah, it's going to happen very quickly. The fate will be determined really soon after the second half begins. But I talked to Pete Alonso at the All-Star game about that, and it kind of echoing a certain sentiment where all it takes is you win a series, maybe you win another series after that, you have a good week, suddenly you have a good month, and things can kind of turn around a little bit. That has yet to happen for the Mets, and that last road trip before the All-Star break, kind of encouraging. They were above 500. They won one good series and could not beat the Padres of all teams in that series. So it's very tricky. It's hard to gain continuity. But again, there's so much talent there that can happen at any time, especially when you have the veteran pitching that they do. Now, if Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander don't stay healthy for any reason, there's probably not a long enough runway. You can probably forget about the NL East division title. They're way too far behind the Atlanta Braves. But, there's a lot of flawed teams in that wild card race, and the Mets certainly are one of them. But it's the kind of thing where if you take care of your own business and you have a really good month, say something along the lines of 18 and 12, somewhere in that range, suddenly you're right at the very top of those teams. So it's never too late for a team that talented, but the next week is going to be really crucial because then you're just coming up on 10 or so days before they have to decide whether to be buyers or sellers. And, winning is the only way to get on the right side of that ledger.
I do want to talk to you about Atlanta, but just staying with the Mets for a second. I mean, did Pete offer any kind of insight into why this star-studded roster has struggled to find consistency?
Not particularly, just because it's tough for a guy to try to maybe point a finger at one element or the other. To me, I just think not necessarily not enough has been made, but it's easy to overlook Edwin Diaz's absence. Went down with a knee injury during the World Baseball Classic. Really meant so much to their team last year, not just the 32 saves, but the late innings that he provided. And it's really hard for a team to gain continuity when you really only have a couple of reliable pieces in the bullpen right now. If you look at if Diaz was healthy, then David Robertson would slot into an earlier inning, and they'd probably hold a lot of those leads. Right now, he's asked to kind of be the setup guy and the closer, and that's putting way too much on his plate. And a lot of other guys haven't stepped up in that role. So for me, it's a little bit of being too thin on the back end of the bullpen, and a lot of underperformance and inconsistency. So that's going to happen, but it's particularly soul crushing when you fritter away the games that it seems like you're going to win.
Yeah. You mentioned Scherzer and Verlander. When we had John Heyman on a couple of weeks ago, maybe longer than that at this point, actually, summer has just been flying by. One of the things he hypothesized, and he's not the only one, is that the pitch clock has really affected some of these veterans and these veteran teams. And some of the changes that were implemented this season haven't necessarily benefited some of the veterans on these rosters, which has led to some really unique surprises in the season. Do you think that has been the case with some of these veteran pitchers? And do you expect Major League Baseball to make an adjustment for the pitch clock in the postseason?
Maybe and no. We'll start with the postseason. I think it's the kind of thing that the players have asked about it. They, the Tony Clark, the union chief, he has stated that they would like a little bit of an adjustment or a little bit of leeway for the postseason. That obviously requires some sort of engagement with Major League Baseball, and Rob Manfred hasn't necessarily indicated that that's something that he's going to explore. The way he put it is the game should be the same in the regular season as it is in the postseason. So not likely to get another second or two. As for whether that's unduly affected or disproportionately affected veteran guys like Scherzer and Verlander, I don't necessarily think that's true. I mean, it would be hard to really pinpoint that just because those guys are, they're in their late 30s, early 40s. There could be a lot of reasons why, why they haven't been as dominant, why they maybe have had a couple of injury flare-ups here or there. So, everybody's had to deal with it. Offense hasn't necessarily exploded. The team batting average or the league-wide batting average is up a few points, but it's still pretty modest, right around 248, up from 243, which also includes the ban on shifts to one side of the diamond. So I don't think that would be too big of a factor relative to the fact that we're still seeing great pitching performances from other guys.
If the Mets can't figure out a way to find some consistency here in the next week or so, I mean, is it fair to say that Steve Cohen and that organization would likely be looking around at the trade deadline? I mean, I know it's hard to look into a crystal ball, but you'd have to assume that maybe they'd be looking to sell.
Yeah, he did indicate that, and that in somewhat, I don't know if you would consider it a threat, if you will, when he held court with reporters a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, I think it would definitely behoove him to, simply because when you're that far over the luxury tax, moving a $40 million salary, a $10 million salary, that's going to save him a lot more money than any other owner would, because suddenly you're lowering your luxury tax liability. So if you move a Verlander or you move a Scherzer, the projected $485 million payroll, that becomes considerably less when you consider the salary and you consider the luxury tax penalties there. Very complex deals to pull off at the trade deadline, because they'll want to try to recoup some young players, and they would also want to move some salary. But contending teams or teams on the fringe of contention may not want to take on what would be the prorated equivalent of roughly 18 million or so for the last bit of the season there. So easier said than done, but if they lose and if things get worse and they kind of feel this need to go back to the drawing board in the off season, why not move salary now? So yeah, once again, these next 10, 15 games coming out of the break are just absolutely paramount for the Mets.
What's been the most surprising part of the Padres' decline for you?
Yeah, that's it's really weird. It's like both of those teams are in this Bermuda Triangle. Huge spending teams. They won the off season. They had huge acquisitions such as Xander Bogaerts, $280 million. It's tough to pinpoint one thing. It's just a matter kind of sequencing, you might say. They've done very poorly in close games. They've had good players go really cold at inopportune times. Juan Soto started off really slowly. He's now back in the mix, but then Manny Machado has had a very poor second half and then got injured for a spell. He's back. He hit 2 home runs in the final game before the break. So that's kind of an interesting prelude to the second half. It's not to say Manny is back, but if there's one guy who has definitely underperformed, it's probably Machado in terms of him getting a $350 million contract to avoid him opting out at the end of the season, and just has not been very effective, hasn't been consistent, kind of a huge hole in the middle of that Padre lineup, which makes it difficult to find offensive continuity and to wage comebacks in close games, which has kind of been their Achilles heel this year. So I think Manny getting hot, or Manny just returning to levels that they expected from him, would make a pretty big difference with the Padres.